Hi everyone, welcome back to the Robertson Media Center at UVA. Today we're going to continue our tutorial on DaVinci Resolve by discussing the basics of audio and transitions. Again, this video is intended for beginners and it only really covers enough to get started. So let's add some audio into DaVinci Resolve here, and you can see I have this edit I've made. Let's say that these are interviews and all the things that I need, but I want to have music in the background. So the first thing you do, of course, is you grab a piece of music and you bring it in. As you can see here, I've drag and drop. Make sure it goes all the way to the front. And now if I were to play through, I could have this piece of music underneath. Right? So now I have the music underneath, and you can place it on a completely separate layer, so it can be totally separate from all the other audio that you have. But you're going to need to mix it, right? There's a problem here if I were to have some talking like here. Counterpart of genes, and that they organically evolve. That the music and the talking are probably going to interrupt each other. So we need to drop down and mix levels. This is called mixing, and this is where you take all the things that are on top of each other and playing all at once, and you kind of increase or decrease the volume, etc., to make sure that what needs to be heard in a particular moment is heard clearly and not interrupted by something else or distracted by something else. So depending on your timeline settings, if you look over here, if you click on the timeline view options, you want to make sure that you turn on your waveforms and that your audio waveforms are turned on here. And actually in this menu, it's nice because you can drag across this. This is the audio track height. So then you can look at all of them kind of expanded a lot easier. But you can also grab each individual one and drag it out as large as you would like, or you can close them down if they're getting in your way. Problem with having them all open is you've got to scroll over here to see everything all in one place. But when you're working with audio and you say that, oh, the video's all done, I can actually drag this upward, for instance, and then I have a little bit more space to deal with down here. This is your audio waveform. A waveform is essentially sound over time, so it's volume over time. So you can see the peaks and you can see when things are and aren't happening. So for instance, right here, you can see that there's talking, and then there's nothing, and then there's talking again. So you can see a waveform, what that looks like. On your music, you can see it's playing continuously, and you can see when it's loudest. Here you have more of a beat, for instance, or more of a, things happening, and this is a little smoother, softer happening here in the waveform. Again, we need to mix, so you can see that there's a lot of stuff happening through here, and then there's some talking going on here. If I were to go to my detail view, inside of this clip here, there's actually a little line there. You can see as I hover over, that symbol changes. And that symbol is showing you that the volume bar is right there. So if I click it and drag, you can see I can increase or decrease the volume of an individual clip. We'll turn that to 0 decibels. So negative means that you're turning the volume down. Positive is turning it up. Turn that here. And you can do that on each one of these tracks. So that's the first way you're going to mix. You can say, oh, the music is too loud throughout, so I can just drop down by a couple decibels the music track itself. So each individual piece of audio has its own volume bar. And that is the very basic way of increasing or decreasing the volume. Another thing each track has, as I come over here, you can see that there is a little corner here that as I hover over, again, this is all with my regular selection arrow tool. As I hover over and I drag, I can create a fade in or a fade out. So if I grab this little node here, I can adjust the shape here of the fade in or fade out, how much of a curve there is. But that's getting really specific. But just make sure that you can fade in and fade out, which simply means that you're starting with the volume at 0 and you're moving up to the full volume, which just makes a much smoother transition. This is a form of transitions. And it's called a fade, crossfade, fade in, fade out. These are going to make your clips come in and out much, much smoother and seem much more polished. So if you think about that fade in, right, you're basically creating a change over time to this volume bar. It's what's called a keyframe. They're animation points for a particular setting. And so that one is just creating one at the beginning and end. What if you want it in the middle? For instance, down here on the music, you may want the music louder during this section here where there isn't talking, and then drop down to get quieter during the talking. What you'll need to do is you'll need to hold the Option or Alt button, and you can create key points on the volume bar. So if I want this to drop down a little bit, I want this louder here, drop down in volume while the talking's happening, and then as soon as the talking is over, I can hold Option again and create a point and drag it back up. So you can see it drops down for the talking and back up. And you can do the same thing. This might be a bit extreme. But that's how you mix music in with talking. You essentially hold Option, you create points on the volume bar, and then you drop it down when the speaking is happening. And when it's not, you can bring it back up, right? So the sounds don't interfere with each other. And this you'll do on every single piece of audio to really truly mix, to make sure at a particular moment, how loud is it, and does that work with the other sounds in the mix? You're weaving it together, right? All the pieces are kind of fitting together into a tapestry. And you'll notice with sound, unlike, video, or if you're doing like visual stuff, you can only really see one thing at a time. Sound all comes in all together as kind of one thing that we're hearing and mixes together really nicely. One other thing you may want to do is say, oh, everything's too loud or everything is too soft. Well, you're going to have to go through it without another tool and grab every single one of these volume bars and turn them up or down. If you look in the top right corner, there's something called a mixer. There's this little button here called mixer. If you select that, then it brings up the individual track's volume. You can see that the volume comes up and shows individually on each track. So this is where you can actually turn up and down the volume of individual tracks, or this M1 here is the main, it's the master, and you can turn up and down the master. So this is where you could say, oh, everything needs to be 2 decibels louder or 2 decibels quieter. So this is where you can turn up and down the entire mix. And I'll turn that back off. So next, let's talk about transitions. Now, there are both audio and video transitions that are available in this program. And the first one is audio. It's pretty simple because it's very similar to what we just showed. Essentially, you can have a crossfade that you can put onto audio clips. And that's going to create kind of a transition from 0 up to the full volume, or you can do it from one clip to another, which is where this becomes much more useful. You can see that they show up right here. These little symbols here are crossfades. Go up to your effects library. It's in the top left-hand corner of the window. And if you select effects library, it's going to bring up a toolbox right here. And in that toolbox, you select audio transitions. And this is where you can find the crossfade. Just start with the 0 decibel. And if you drag it on, you can actually place it onto your clip. If I drag and drop now, that crossfades kind of slowly out to 0. So if you have 2 clips that are together, you can actually add a crossfade from one to the other. And what you can do here is you just drag this on and you can place it on the point where they meet. Put another one here. And now it's going to crossfade from this clip to the other. Right, so it's a nice way to transition from one to the next. So for instance, if you had some music, you could do that. You could, cut this up here. Go back to your selection tool, delete this, and you could slide this one over. And then if you add a crossfade, it's going to kind of transition across that point in music. One other way that you can do that, if I select these, I can actually just press delete and get rid of them. If I select that point where they meet, I can right click and I can add a crossfade here. So if I do a 14 frame, I could do longer. If I undo that, I can add a 60 frame. And then you get this notice, oh, some of the clips have insufficient handles. All that means is that you don't have enough material to crossfade from one to the next. So it'll either have to be a shorter crossfade or you need to cut something out so it has something to go from. So let me show you what that means. If I drag this outward, you can see I only have that much, right? That's where I began recording. So I don't have anything on this side of it for it to crossfade in from, right? So if it's going to fade in up here to get to this point, it needs something to come from. So that's why I can crossfade, is because I actually have, you see that down below, I have that extra little bit that I'm crossfading in from. You need to have enough of that in order to actually be able to do the crossfade. So I have enough for a 6 frame. And as you can see, if I say 14, I don't have enough for 14 frames. If you drag and drop it on, it automatically creates a shorter one, and that's as much as you can crossfade from one to the other. So that's very basic mixing. So you're going to be doing transitions, fades. You're going to then also be holding Option and Alt and adjusting on the actual volume frame, like so. Right? So you can create points and drop in or out on the audio. And you're going to figure out in each moment what's the best thing to be hearing and in what volume at any particular time in your video. And just make sure that in most cases you're going to fade in and fade out almost every clip. Similarly, if I drag this down here and I go to video transitions, I can add almost the exact same thing onto a video. So here I have the dancing baby going to the hamster dance videos here. And if I drag this one, cross dissolve, it's very similar to a crossfade, it's just for video. If I drag that on here, it creates a transition where it's transitioning from the baby, right? Smooth transition over to the hamster dance. It's a nice way to, move from one clip to the other without a hard cut. And it is called a cross dissolve. You can see at the beginning of the video, I have a lot of these, right? A fade in for the first opening title, right? Cross dissolve in, and then I cross dissolve into all of these other clips here. This is something used quite often for a smooth, you see how I kind of cross dissolve between all of those clips on that portion. It's to create a very smooth transition point. There are other transitions in here. You may have seen some of these, like an iris, right? If I were to put that on this hamster dancing baby edit, you can see it's kind of cheesy. You want to avoid that. I'm going to undo this one. Here's a iris. You can see cross iris. These are all a little bit PowerPointy. They are kind of can get kind of cheesy very quickly. You want something that's really professional seeming, and there are very few of these actually that work that way. Anything in the dissolve area is gonna look pretty good. A blur dissolve is nice, right? Maybe a little much, but certainly a little less loud and bold than some of the like page turns, for instance, or wipes, slides, things like that. One more thing on these, if you go back up, I'll put on a cross dissolve. These are actually, you can edit them with the regular selection arrow tool, just like you would a clip. So I can extend them or shorten them here. On any of them, you can basically, it's like trimming. So you can extend them or trim them just using the arrow tool. Okay, so we've done some basic audio mixing. We've done transitions. But you're wondering, how do I record my voiceover, or how do I record directly into the program? We're going to cover it more once we get to some of the more advanced audio stuff later in a different video. But you have to actually record in a different workspace. So I can't record inside this editing workspace. I have to go to a workspace called Fairlight. You can see down here this little musical note. If I select that, and then this is your advanced audio editing suite. This is where you can do a lot of the more advanced audio editing, again in a later video, but we're going to cover how to record audio directly into the program here, because this is the only place you can do it. Looks a lot like the editor, right? You have all of your audio in here. Up top, you have your mixer. Remember, we covered the mixer, right? Looking over here, I can turn that on and off on the side. But this is where you're actually going to do your recording. So as you'll see, there's another button over on the left-hand side with an R in it. This is selecting which track you are going to record to. So make sure if you're saying, oh, I want to record into audio track 5, since it's empty right here, I can select R. And then when I press the record button, it's going to record to that track, and it's determining which one it goes to. However, you also have to set up your input. So if I come over to my mixer on the far right, again, if you hit the little mixer button to make it come up, scroll over to whichever one that you've selected, and you hit input. And this is where you're going to select your input, which for me is this Yeti stereo microphone. So you can see on audio 5, I've selected the stereo microphone I'm going to use. If it were on audio 4, for instance, right, audio 4, I can select a different microphone. And if you say patch, it actually sets what the input is for that individual track. And then you can close the window. And you can see it says it here, Yeti stereo microphone. You can see the levels bounce as I talk. And over here in the mixer, up here on track 5. And this is how you can tell that your microphone's working, that you are recording directly right from a microphone, and that your levels are properly set. So what are levels? As you can see, as I'm talking, it gets a bit in the red. And if I back up a little bit, you can see it's down here over in the kind of yellow-green area. Those are general indicators of how loud something should be when you're recording it. If it gets to the red, or especially if it hits 0, it's called clipping. Clipping means that your sound is too loud for the individual microphone that you have selected. And that's bad. You get really bad distortion. So try to avoid that. But also if it's down too low, you will start recording some of the other noises in the room. And as you turn up the volume on that track, you're going to hear them even louder. So you want a far enough separation from what's the speaking or the thing that you're recording and what's called the noise floor. The noise floor is the basic electronic noise that your microphone makes. Every microphone has a noise floor, and also whatever else is in the room. So if you have an air conditioner going, or you have a, let's say a refrigerator going in the background, all those things are going to be recorded, but you want them as far away from the thing you want actually heard as possible. So if I were to step away and I'm recording with my voice at this level, and then I have turned that up, you can see how much of the background noise you can also hear, versus if as I'm talking normally into this microphone at a proper volume. For speech or something loud, that yellow range, or even just a little bit into the red, is perfect. For peaks, -5 to -10 is great. For the rest of the talking, for the majority of it, -10, -15 down to -20 is perfectly fine. If something's below -30 or especially below like -40 or -50, then it's not going to be heard very clearly. So just make sure that when you are recording directly into the program, you set your levels correctly. If you're recording something somewhere else, just make sure you set the levels in that app or on your audio recorder, etc. So we're ready to record, right? So all I do is I make sure that I have my track selected with R, and I press the record button. And now everything I say is going to be recorded into my project. And if I hit stop, now you can see it's recorded exactly where I placed it with my playhead, right? So wherever I place my playhead and I hit record, that's where it's going to record onto whatever track I've selected. So those are the basics of audio and transitions. Coming up next, we're going to talk about the basics of text and some really simple effects. Stick with us.